Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I am Tony Banut, the Executive Director of the Chicago Forum for Free Inquiry and Expression. And before we begin tonight's event, I just want to thank our many co-sponsors, International House, the Pearson Institute, the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, the Posen Family Center for Human Rights. Tonight's event is also made possible thanks to the Zell Family Foundation and the Chicago Forum Zell Event Series. This is our first in a set of events under the broader theme, What Might Peace Look Like? Notice the question itself is an invitation to a conversation. We hope that it invites curiosity and exchange. It is not requesting a definitive answer. It is requesting your engagement with the seemingly countless dimensions and angles and the profoundly tragic Israel-Palestine conflict. Personally, like I'm sure many of us, I have some ideas about what a political solution might be. This is certainly one level of peace, and probably the one that comes to mind first for many of us. But there are more dimensions to it. I have notions about what peace means relationally and interpersonally here in our community. I have thoughts about the relationship between justice and peace, conflict and reconciliation. I have categories of things that I deem irreconcilable and a set of things I place within the Overton window of possibility. I also have some understanding of inner peace and well-being that ties to all of these larger questions. But all of these notions are confounded when I confront the human dimensions of the current conflict. Several days ago, I met two of the many courageous medics who volunteer in hospitals in Gaza. They described scenes of unimaginable horror, children with gunshot wounds, amputations with no anesthesia, hallways soaked in civilian blood. The prior evening, I talked to two young Israelis who survived the Nova Music Festival massacre on October 7th. They recounted how they fled Hamas militants, bullets whizzing overhead, as they hid in shrubs and ditches. The cries of victims, many of them their friends, slaughtered and taken captive. In all honesty, my own inclinations about what peace might look like on a grand scale, feel rather tenuous and shaky when I take those stories in. On the most fundamental level, I know peace does not look like that. We start this series with a conversation between law professor and Chicago Forum faculty director Tom Ginsburg and former Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, Professor Salam Fayyad. But before we get there, the aim of the Chicago Forum is not just to talk about the importance of free inquiry and expression on this campus, but to do it. That is, to create meaningful opportunities to practice it. Those opportunities are especially important for topics like this, where passions are high and our stories and experiences are so varied. So tonight, we're going to try something a bit different that will warm us up for the conversation to follow. We will speak freely to one another first. To lead us in that, please allow me to introduce Nick Epley, the John Templeton Keller Distinguished Service Professor of Behavioral Science at the Booth School of Business. Please.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for coming. A few years ago, I was in an off-cycle graduation, and I found myself standing next to Jay Ellison, former Dean of Students, and this was shortly after he sent a letter out to our incoming first-year students that made national news. You may remember this moment. In that letter to our incoming new first-year students, he explained what our culture was like here at the University of Chicago. Once here, he said, you will discover that one of the University of Chicago's defining characteristics is our commitment to freedom of inquiry and expression. Fostering the free exchange of ideas reinforces a related university priority, building a campus that welcomes people of all backgrounds. Diversity of opinion and background is a fundamental strength of our community. The members of our community must have the freedom to espouse and explore a wide range of ideas. So in true University of Chicago fashion, we were going to try to practice that here before our conversation today. And also in true University of Chicago fashion, we are also going to try to collect some data around this, which I will show you at the end of the session today as well. So here's what we're going to do. In just a minute, I want you to turn and find somebody around you you don't know. That should be pretty easy. There are probably lots of people here you don't know, okay? And you're going to pair yourself up with that person. Ideally, this is someone who maybe has a different opinion than you do. And you're going to have a conversation, okay? You're going to have a conversation with them for about 15 minutes about the topic at hand tonight. And here are some of the questions that I would like you to consider. How have you personally been affected by this conflict? How does thinking about this conflict make you feel? If you could create a perfect world, what would the solution to this conflict look like? In the real world, what do you think is the best path forward? And the last question, is there anything you can do personally to encourage peace in any area you have influence over? Before I actually have you find somebody and have a conversation with them, speak freely for a little bit and listen freely for a bit. I want you to pull out one of your tools of disconnection, if you would, and go to this survey. And I want you to tell me how you think that conversation's going to go, how that conversation's going to make you feel, okay? The first page that you're going to see is required by our university IRB whenever we collect data like this. We need to ask you your permission to use your data in any scientific analysis that we might do. You don't have to agree to that. If you say no, that's no problem, certainly at all. You will continue. And then there are going to be some questions about how you think this conversation in just a minute is going to go for you, how it's going to make you feel, okay? You're going to get to a point where you need a password. At that point, just stop. We'll wait. I will give you the password once you're done with your conversation. Go. You can either scan the QR code or you can enter the website beneath it. Okay, if you're still finishing up the survey, just continue it. For those of you who have finished it, stand up, look around, find somebody, have your conversation. Go. So please, if you are still finishing up, please complete it as we get started here. I will come back and show you some of the early results of what we learned through this, and then I will send out a full debriefing at the end of this as well to everybody who registered. And now it's time for me to introduce Denise Jorgens, who's going to introduce the main event for tonight.
So welcome, and thank you again for joining us. I am Denise Jorgens. I'm the director here at International House at the University of Chicago. On behalf of the worldwide International House community, we are so pleased to be hosting today's program, What Might Peace Look Like? This is a special year for international houses worldwide and our community, as our first international house in New York City just celebrated their 100th anniversary. International House of Chicago was founded by John D. Rockefeller Jr. in 1932. Since we opened our doors, our mission has been to promote cross-cultural understanding, mutual respect, and friendship among students and scholars, and on the part of the people of metropolitan Chicago and the broader communities that we serve, toward individuals of all nations and backgrounds. Through the International House Student Life Experience and our over 100 internationally focused public programs held annually, such as today's event, International House is dedicated to transforming people's lives for a better world. This mission is further extended through the International House's worldwide organization, which is currently a network of 16 houses on 4 continents. And now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Salam Fayyad is an economist and former Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority. With the International Monetary Fund from 1987 to 2001, his tenure included serving as IMF resident representative in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip from 1996 to 2001. He then served as manager of the Arab Bank in Palestine, and in June 2002, he was named Minister of Finance of the Palestinian Authority. Until he resigned in December 2005, Dr. Fayyad served in that capacity on several cabinets, introducing in the process extensive financial reforms. In June 2007, he was appointed Prime Minister, a position he held until he stepped down in June 2013. Currently, Dr. Fayyad is a visiting senior scholar and lecturer in public policy and Daniela Lipper-Kuhl's distinguished visitor in foreign affairs at the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. He's also a distinguished statesman with the Atlantic Council's Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security, a group which I might say is very involved with our sister house in Washington, D.C. And he is a distinguished fellow at the Brookings Institution. Dr. Fayyad holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the American University of Beirut. He has an MBA from St. Edward's University and a PhD in economics from the University of Texas at Austin. Professor Fayyad will be in conversation with Tom Ginsburg. Tom Ginsburg is the Leo Spitz Distinguished Service Professor of International Law, Ludwig and Hilda Wolf Research Scholar, and the inaugural Faculty Director of the Forum for Free Inquiry and Expression. Tom Ginsburg focuses on comparative and international law from an interdisciplinary perspective. He holds BA, JD, and PhD degrees from the University of California at Berkeley. He also directs the Comparative Constitutions Project, serves as faculty director of the Mallier Center for the Study of Institutional and Legal Integrity, and is the co-host of the Entitled podcast on human rights. His latest book is The Chicago Canon, written with Tony Bennett and published by the University of Chicago Press. Welcome, Dr. Fayyad and Professor Ginsburg.
Thank you very much, Denise. So thank you very much. It's an honor to have you here. We're grateful for you making the journey and look forward to the conversation. Those of us who've been following this conflict for a long time remember your time as one of hope and possibility. And so I want to talk, just for those who are not as familiar with the history, I want to lay out first, how you came to this period in government and what your approach was. And maybe the place to start is actually with Oslo. So obviously it's about 30 years ago, there were the Oslo Accords between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. It created the Palestinian Authority. And what was your reaction to those documents, those agreements?
Well, first of all, Tom, thank you very much for hosting me. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and thank you for your interest. I hope we will come out of this with a little bit of better understanding the benefit of the questions and contributions by the audience as well. It's a great tradition that you have here, and I'm totally impressed. I was actually by what happened just before we started this exercise that Nick did. Let me tell you what impressed me the most about it is that the audience actually did exactly what he wanted them to do. And I asked him, actually, how do you do this? I mean, a bunch of strangers, you probably don't know many of them. They just walked in and you stand up and you give them marching orders, and they did exactly what you wanted them to do without anybody complaining about anything. I hope we'll come out with this actually in the spirit of what the exercise is about. People listen to each other and different points of views. I come to the conversation decidedly with a point of view, given my background, both professionally and who I am, my identity, where I grew up, my homeland, and Palestinian aspirations and cause and all of that. And I say that, and as I do, I echo the sentiment, actually, that's widely shared by Palestinians for long dispossessed and looking for the day when they are able to live as free people with dignity in a country of our own that we can call home. And so with that, on the question of Oslo, you're right about when it happened. I was at the time a national civil servant with the IMF at headquarters of the IMF in Washington, D.C., when the actual Declaration of Principles, so-called, was signed on 13th of September, 1993. And I remember it was so momentous, viewed that way. The IMF, which, as many of you know, is very conservative institution with strong traditions, and all, interrupted the meeting of the executive board at the time to actually watch the event, for the executive directors to watch the event. It clearly was a big deal at the time it happened. And of course, it did happen in parallel with talks that happened earlier that were launched at the Madrid conference. A multilateral process in many ways with different parties and all, but then there was this back channel negotiations between Palestinian side and Israeli side, and eventually culminating in an official signing of those documents. So I knew nothing about it, to say the least, as many didn't. There were many in the leadership of Palestinian National Movement who actually were not involved, actually, but for a small group of people who knew that was happening. So it's not too surprising that someone like me, an outsider, an international civil servant at the time, not only not having heard anything about it, but actually not knowing anything about what went into it. But let me tell you honestly, from the very beginning, and fast forward, I moved as IMF Res Rep, as I was introduced kindly by Denise, as IMF Res Rep, going to international meetings on assistance to Palestinian Authority. And of course, the backdrop to all of this were these legal documents and the Paris Protocol, which is part of the overall Oslo agreements. And early on, I felt it necessary, both professionally and given my own background, to know what is in those documents. And from the very beginning, I was struck by something that actually came back to haunt everybody. Maybe at the time, when this thing happened, a lot of people were banking on the breakthrough, leading on the strength of goodwill and strong interest on the part of the International Committee to deliver on that which the Oslo Accords were not about, certainly not explicitly, a state for Palestinian people. Nowhere you're going to find, will you find in the documentation that is Oslo, there's a bunch of them, there are several agreements, any reference to Palestinian statehood. There was a reference to the process that was initiated with that historic event, the White House loan on September 13, 1993, culminating in agreement on so-called permanent status issues, translated issues that the parties could not agree to back in 1993. They deferred them for final agreement in the process of negotiations. So the end game was from the get-go defined as reaching agreement on those important issues: Jerusalem, refugees, borders, etc., settlements. Of course, that was a big thing for somebody looking at this from the outside, as I did for the first time. That was, glaring omission. If this is about statehood, there is nothing. You could say not even by implication. We could get in a long conversation as to why it is that our side signed onto those agreements. I'm prepared to really enter into that, but in the interest of time, just very quickly to really go over my own reaction to what happened. Everything that subsequently happened, both in the context of my career as international civil servant and subsequently as a civil servant working for the Palestinian Authority beginning in the summer of 2002, the height of the Second Intifada, confirmed me in the belief that there was something that's structurally wrong with this, that was going to come back to haunt all of us. And in fact, when I say all of us, all parties, when you look at where things are today, I think there are no doubt more than some who had wished that this had ended differently, and for it to have ended differently, I argued then, not too publicly, but I would argue today, that for any process to take us to peace, it definitely has to be based on something more than wishful thinking, that it could lead to something that would really bring about peace. This is about what peace might look like, and it should be more about, no tension, as famously said by Martin Luther King, that true peace is not the absence of tension, it's the presence of justice. We are long ways from that point. But to get to that point, I argue today, and I argued all along, to be honest with you, that the process actually has to start from, it has to have a different starting point. It has to start from point of view of recognition of important principle in human relations, parity. People are people, and you can't really get into a process thinking that's going to deliver justice if the starting point of that conversation is not inspired or informed by that key organizing principle. If we ever get to that point, but first we need to get to the absence of tension, which appears to be a high bar now, even given the war that's going on. That's one set of considerations that I have touched on. Generally speaking, and I'll stop with that second observation I'm about to make, my reaction to the agreements and the way things were unfolding, and as I just mentioned, I joined the Palestinian Authority at the height of the Second Intifada, June of 2002, as Minister of Finance. And it was very messy then, and we thought it was the worst of time then. Well, by comparison, those were, I cannot say good old days, definitely, but nothing compared to what's going on right now. No matter, they were very horrible days and very difficult times. Everything that we wanted to do, we would confront the difficulties associated with the poor design, the structural design, the power asymmetry that actually was embedded in the agreements and all of that sort of thing. So extremely difficult to do things under occupation, extremely difficult to expect an agreement that was inspired by what people thought at the time, or some may have thought was constructive ambiguity, that ended up being not so constructive in the end. That hamstrung everything that we tried to do, which conditioned my own thinking as to how to really get to the point. If it was difficult, I thought to myself at the time, for Israelis to agree to something as basic as saying that 5 years from now, this will end with Palestinian statehood, with separation of two sides, with Palestinians having their own state. If it was that difficult for them to commit to words like that, I thought to myself, it was most unlikely for a Palestinian state to emerge out of the agreement and out of talks based on that agreement. And I concluded that the only way, as I do believe today, something that was going to happen and could happen, was if we Palestinians went out and projected the reality of that state on the ground, in spite of the occupation, and as a means, and an effective means, I would argue, of resisting it. And that was the investment that I thought we should make, and I tried to really contribute to that as best as I could, to building and in reinforcing the structures and institutions of the state to be. I thought if we had those on the ground, that would be the reality of it. Yes, difficult to do under occupation. Ask me about that, and I tried my hand of it in different capacities, first as a cabinet officer, but then eventually as prime minister beginning in 2007 for about 6 years. Very difficult to do, but it's definitely inspiring if it is articulated in a way that people can relate to, and it's an open invitation for all Palestinians to really get involved in, and it's an act of empowerment, as empowerment can best be, to be honest with you. So that the agreement as I saw it, and that's the influence, the weaknesses of the agreement, so the structural weaknesses of the agreement, the kind of thinking, those inspired me, and the line that they inspired me to take.
Of course, statehood, so I'm an international lawyer, so statehood is a legal construct, and we talk about, is this a state or is it not a state? But, and by the way, Palestine has been recognized by 3/4 of the members of the United Nations, so there's a lot of recognition, and you could even argue that there is a state in that legal sense, but you're talking about stateness in the sense of bureaucratic capacity to do things. So I wonder if you could say a little more about your effort to build institutions, because that's what I think your great contribution.
For a national movement, particularly stateless people, like Palestinians were when the contemporary national movement emerged, late 50s, early 60s, mid 60s, depending on when you start measuring this, although of course the struggle for Palestinian rights started way before that, as everybody knows. But if you really take that as a starting point, recognition is important to national liberation movement. So that was a key driver. And I say this as an observation. It's something that had some positives, obviously. I understand where it comes from. If you're trying to lead stateless people to statehood, you definitely would welcome and would try to get as much recognition as you possibly could, regionally, internationally, what have you. Doesn't really mean you have stayed there, but recognition is an important driver. And if you study our history analytically, it's very hard to escape that conclusion. It's very hard to escape the conclusion that the quest for recognition was an important driver. It's important. And to a large extent, it explains the trajectory of the Palestinian national movement, the way it can really emerge, some tensions from within factions and factional rivalries and what have you, for the privilege of representation. What you refer to, what you reference, recognition of Palestinian statehood is an extension of that at some level. So first it was like, who represents the Palestinian people? We are stateless, obviously. And this predated the contemporary Palestinian revolution, going back to 20th century, last century. But, again, fast forward to the 50s, 60s, it was an important thing. That took some time, but eventually it culminated in the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, being recognized as the sole legitimate representative of Palestinian people. It was considered to be a big deal. And by the way, and I say this in a positive way, it added importantly to the Palestinians' quest for having shared sense of identity. The thing that bonded Palestinians, we talk about elements that define identity of a people and all of that. Nakba was a defining moment in our history. When you say, what is Palestinian cause? Refugees. 50s, 60s started to turn into something else. And you credit the PLO, as a matter of fact, for really having added that dimension to our sense of identity. Because, just being the victim of something, that sense of victimhood, and it's deep, and it's certainly not uniquely a Palestinian phenomenon. But you can't, on the strength of just that, kind of build nationhood. You need something more. You need resistance. You need to really bring that into this. If there is injustice, you definitely need to really have mechanisms, have an idea as to how you're going to resist it, to end it. Because that really is the true peace as defined by Martin Luther King, the presence of justice. How do you really get there unless you turn the movement into an active instrument of empowering people, of assuming full agency in the act of your own liberation? So that's what happened. And we kind of really related to this, and I say this personally as someone who never had a party affiliation or factional affiliation, but I kind of related to that PLO as a home, more important than anything else we could get as Palestinians, very important. But then the issue of statehood, the PLO itself started to kind of make a shift in the direction of accepting as a solution to the conflict a state on the territory Israel occupied in 1967. This is generally considered to have happened formally in 1988, but actually official signals in that direction started to emerge in the mid-70s. That's an important point, actually, of departure. That's when the issue of recognition started to really come in. It was not enough to say PLO was the sole legitimate representative of Palestinian people, but we have these countries who recognize state of Palestine. Of course, started with Arab countries. Palestine, state of Palestine, member of the Arab League, for example, and then Islamic Conference, and as you rightly pointed out, some 150 countries of the United Nations now, in a formal way, recognize the state of Palestine. I draw a distinction, between that, like as a statement of recognition, a construction of sorts, and the reality of the state. And if you ask me, I think probably, I haven't done the arithmetic on this, maybe somebody could Google it, but probably there are more countries around the world that recognize state of Palestine than countries that recognize state of Israel. That certainly was true at a certain point in time. I haven't looked it up recently, but that's true. But there's a big distinction. Israel has existed now for 76 years, and state of Palestine is yet to happen. That, to me, is the goal. State of Palestine as a sovereign entity, home for Palestinian people. A place that we Palestinians can relate to as our home. A place where we can exercise national citizenship, sense of affiliation, belonging, where we can live with freedom and dignity. That has eluded us, notwithstanding the large number of states around the world that have recognized us, which I appreciate. I have ideas about how the cause can be revived, diplomatically and internationally, in the direction of getting us started. Maybe we get in a conversation with that. What I value more than recognition of Palestinian statehood without reference to where it is, by the way. I mean, one would be right to think this is political fiction. I mean, if you're in Gaza today, like somebody says 150 countries recognize state of Palestine, that's political fiction. You don't have to be in Gaza under the barrage of death and destruction, misery, and famine to kind of be this disillusion. You can be Palestinian in Lebanon, you can be Palestinian anywhere in the world. And there are times it feels good that we have this a large number of countries recognizing something is called state of Palestine. But in the absence of the credible path forward to statehood, the real statehood, it's political fiction. I don't want to diminish, the importance, but I draw sharp distinction between sympathy with the Palestinian cause, which I appreciate, but and recognition of statehood as an abstract construct. We need to build on that, beginning by a drive to recognize our right as a people to a state defined as something that be a good way to begin. Maybe it's something we can build on in the conversation, but that's different from we recognize you. It's quite different. And I would close on this by saying it's not a coincidence, actually, that the foundational pillar of Oslo, so-called Declaration of Principles, Mutual Declaration of Principles, I don't know if one really can call it that, but or Mutual Declaration of Recognition, if you will. What's so mutual about it? When one side, that's the Palestinians, represented by the PLO, acting on behalf of all Palestinians, recognize not Israel's existence, but the right of the state of Israel to exist in peace and security. It's profoundly higher grade and higher form of recognition, given your background. I'm sure you know the big difference between the two. And coming from the Palestinian side, this recognition is actually hugely significant, given the history, given the competing historical narratives and whatnot. And what did we get in return for that? To call it mutual. We got recognition by the government of Israel based on that statement of the PLO as the representative of Palestinian people, for no purpose other than to give effect and validity to the signature of PLO on that instrument that said we recognize the right of the state. It's time to square that circle. If Oslo was the start of something, and if it's to be righted, in a way that is meaningful, that promises delivery at some point. We need to go back and square that circle. Our right to a state has to be recognized, and that has to be the starting point of the conversation.
So, from my perspective,
That's why I don't teach Israel Palestine.
Yes.
You see, I have
Yeah.
I have strong views on
yes,
this.
well, yeah, it's interesting. He's a professor at Princeton, and he doesn't teach this conflict. We'll come to that. I find that really interesting. But just staying on the Oslo thing, I mean, conflicts like this do end, and what is required, from my point of view, is that you have moderates on both sides who are willing to do a deal with each other, and they can control the people who want violence, the hardliners, if you will. And in a way, what happened in Oslo, right, is that the hardliners spoiled it very quickly. Rabin gets killed. There's all the suicide bombings that begin with Hamas in the mid-90s. And so just thinking for that perspective, and I should add, we're in a moment when obviously war is in charge on both sides. People who want war are in charge on both sides. What would it take to re-empower moderates on both sides who could work together?
Well, as you said, war now dominates the scene, and if peace, just peace, not true peace, is about the absence of tension, let's begin by getting rid of tension in the form of a devastating war, the like of which we have never really seen before. I mean, in terms of the casualties of it, and it continues to rage on, we have lost more people over the span of a year than Palestinian people lost over the length of the conflict, cumulatively, up until October 7. And still goes on. But when you are looking at a situation like this, you need to prioritize bringing this war to an end. First of all, I mean, it's a modest target, this absence of tension, that is a war. Let's stop the war. Bring about a ceasefire. Prioritize bringing about ceasefire in Gaza. Something that's made all more important by the escalation in the north, by the way. It shifted attention. There were a lot of casualties, well over 2,000 people, Lebanese people, and as we were walking in, just got news of a massive explosion in Lebanon, and the whole building came down, 22 people getting killed. This is daily routine now. Pushing some to kind of really focus on Lebanon, given the implications for and possibility for region-wide war and all. Let's compartmentalize and deal with Lebanon first because of the Iranian angle and Hezbollah and the rest of it. And I argued one way of actually bringing about the escalation, as I say, absence of tension, stopping the war, the escalation, if you will. I think that effort could be well served by refocusing attention on the need to bring about ceasefire in Gaza. And why am I saying this? Because both Hezbollah as well as Iran said that they were willing to stop doing things if there is ceasefire in Gaza. There's also something else that happened recently. Lebanon expressed willingness, readiness to implement United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701. For those of you who are not familiar with this, this is United Nations Security Council resolution that brought the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah to an end, Lebanon said. And it provided for a zone south of Litani River where there was not going to be any militias. And it's a stretch of land, essentially, that Israel had occupied between the year 1982 through 2000. But now we're talking 2006. The resolution was never really taken that seriously and all of that sort of thing. And there are a lot of people who would say, I mean, can you really take this to the bank? I mean, government of Lebanon is weak. I mean, they say we're ready to implement 1701 and all of that now, fully, they say, which I think is interesting. And I understand the skepticism when it comes to Lebanon, what has become of it over years of degradation of institutional capabilities, stateness, if you will. Obviously, it's a challenge, but this is something that they're saying. And diplomats, I do not count myself as one, but would love to have an extra instrument to kind of really work with. So if you were to, how do you escalate if they're saying this? If that's what Hezbollah is saying, meaning Lebanon, and that's what Iran is saying, somebody needs to kind of really take a step back, either Israel and or Hezbollah. And if Hezbollah is saying we'll stop if there is ceasefire in Gaza, why not really reprioritize and work on it? It's necessary in and of itself. So the idea of kind of ignoring it because it's difficult, because it defied, the best of efforts and most intense forms of diplomacy involving not only the United States and other important regional partners as well, to no end. It doesn't mean that that effort should not really be made seriously again to try to really get that. So first of all, going back to your question, that's top priority. If you can't get that, how can we really possibly be talking about empowering, moderates and putting ourselves on a path of restoration in some way that could at some point lead to ending the conflict sustainably? It's too tall an order. And I'd say if there is this much failure, lack of capacity to do something as basic as stopping a war that from the very beginning was obviously a war to no end other than the certainty of it leading to the killing, death of tens of thousands of people. If state is what we want, to me, analytically, this consists of two components. One is building it. Two, in the traditional legal international law sense, imparting sovereignty to it. I mean, that's an international dimension to it. Now, that's something that we alone, certainly the latter, cannot do, by ourselves. Our leadership at the time thought, after a long period of, armed struggle and whole, to kind of veer in the direction of engaging in a political process that they had hoped would lead to imparting sovereignty to the state of Palestine. But lost in the shuffle was the other component of this, which is projecting the reality of that state on the ground, building it. And that state to be built is called State of Palestine. And I always argued then and I argue today, with sincerity. If we Palestinians do not build it, who in the world is going to really build it for us? This is our own. If it's a Palestinian state, we must assume full responsibility, take full agency in that act. I never said that by itself was going to get us sovereignty, nor was I oblivious to the fact that by doing so, that form of resistance may not be harsh enough in the face of this brutal, highly oppressive, and capricious occupation regime that we have lived under, continue to live under today. You understand what I'm saying? That is not harsh enough. But the reality is, if people truly understand the nature of the colonial entity, the expansionist, settlement activity, settlement enterprise, the essence of that movement is about replacing us. It's about canceling us. It's about getting rid of us. So if you're really true to what you say about wanting to have a state and all of that, it seems to me first priority must be to ensure steadfastness of your people, meaning that they stick around to really do everything you possibly can to make it possible for them to stick around on the land that you say is ours, on the land where that state of Palestine is going to emerge. That's the point of logic. So as you can see, I'm somebody who really, I'm passionate about this. I truly believe it. At the same time, I understood the criticism, fair criticism, that says this is not going to really go anywhere. This is at best Sisyphean task. Just like continue to push that boulder up the hill, it's going to really roll back on you. And that kind of seemingly is what happened. I admit that. But to me, that's an act of empowerment. You keep on trying. We have to keep on trying. We have to really commit ourselves to that task forever until it happens. But we certainly are not going to go there by silencing each other, not being willing to entertain a different point of view. And that point of view happens to be something I believe then, as I do now, with sincerity and passion, as you can see around. My apologies, but I really strongly feel about this. Is realistic, is necessary, is needed if we're true to what we say. How is it that you expect people to stick around if they are killed by the tens every day? It used to be hundreds at some point. They don't have access to food, if they don't. And in less adverse conditions, meaning before this war, both in Gaza and West Bank, and everybody knows the history and what life is like. How do you really expect people to stick around if they do not have schools they can send their children to get education, if they can't have jobs to stick around, if they do not have healthcare facilities to really seek medical care when they need it? You can't possibly be serious about what you're talking about. If steadfastness means something, then you do that which is necessary to get people to be steadfast and to stick around. And to me, a struggle of survival. One more day, and the day that followed, and the day that followed. A student at a time, a person at a time, a family at a time. That's a long-term struggle, and that's the way we should pursue, this task of getting to where we're going. And this is a project about us. This is not a project against anyone. You understand? You do that which is consistent with what you say is important. So it's time, and I really would wish to have the space and time to have this conversation and be open to the discourse. The idea, and this is a general point, not related necessarily to what I said here, I'm not going to stop too much at that, but this is a university and people should take advantage. I mean, I tell my own students, take advantage of being here. I mean, Princeton is a great school, let me, if I may, in Chicago, put in a good word for Princeton. It's really about this, I mean, not everybody here is students. It's really about students, first and foremost. So we talk about giving them the space to flourish and develop and realize their full potential, not an iota less than what they could become. And the only way you can do that is if, even if it's perfectly understandable for people to congregate behind identity lines or within certain confines of identity, whether that's nationality, ethnicity, faith background, whatnot, this is natural. But it's really good from time to time for people to take a peek at what's going on, in the other circle, in the other group and all of that sort of thing, and accept that there are truths other than ours. We don't have to accept them, but at least we should be respectful enough to really hear them out. And this is the only way we really can come to conclusions. Sometimes I think administrators screw these things up, faculty members screw things up, but that's I believe is the kind of really environment which happens now. For people, this is now serious. For us, having not gotten to where this project was supposed to lead us for many, many decades, and with the prospects of us getting there anytime soon, very dim now, up to and including the point where I have just said, let's just stop the war. This is, minimalist relative to the lofty objective or goal of getting peace and true peace and permanent peace, sustainable peace and all of that sort of thing. So if that is what this is about, it certainly requires that we listen to each other. We accept that there is another point of view, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But let's just see why it didn't work out, and if there are things that we can do to make it work out. And if there is a better idea, fine, let's just, discuss it. But the idea of, my way or the highway is kind of really insane. It seems to me, building towards statehood democratically, in a democratic way, the task of building democratic society, this is a track. Track of building towards statehood is another. They're mutually reinforcing. It's not freedom first and then everything else. And it's not building in a vacuum. You need a political horizon. The two go hand in hand, but they have to go hand in hand. They have to reinforce. We certainly can't get there by shutting each other out of conversation.
Mm-hmm. We're going to turn to questions in just a second, and there's going to be a mic in the middle of the room, I believe. But I want to ask one last question, which is, we've hinted at this paradox that we're in now. The situation on the ground has never been worse. More people killed this year. Gaza, the West Bank kind of ethnic cleansing by administration is proceeding, but support for the Palestinian cause has probably never been higher. And there's this huge shift in Gen Z, and there's the social media and such. So I guess the question I'd like to ask you is, being on a university campus and watching what happened in the last year with demands of statements and demonstrations, what was that like for you?
Yeah, of course, followed it very closely and visited many encampments. Not only in Princeton, but it was a semester during which I took several trips to campuses around the country. including, Harvard, Stanford, Vanderbilt, others as well on multiple occasions. And I saw this happen, and I actually remember very distinctly how it kind of really grew and the fashion it did, and the controversy it generated, and the accompanying polarization and all. History is very recent, and without really getting into it, I think there was a tipping point at some point where things went out of hand. Just as I was fond of really mentioning Princeton University, I do not want to invoke reference to another now. So let's just kind of really sweep that under the rug. You know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
I think in the way some administrations reacted to the incumbents added to the problem.
We'll take a couple of questions at a time, and try to. We'd prefer that you actually ask a question.
Hello. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the informative discussion. So my question goes back to kind of for you personally. I served in the military. I served in the military, so I understand the importance of peace and security, and I understand the power imbalance that can naturally come along with conflict. We all know there's an extreme power imbalance in terms of the capability to make war in that part of the world, and it's going to be very difficult to rectify that imbalance. I don't want to say these are crazy ideas, but if you're looking at the security of the people and the safety of the people versus the goal to reach statehood, what kind of horizon do you look at in terms of how that can be achieved? And I look at this from the sense of, I kind of don't care, and I hope no one holds that against me. I'm an American, and we have more pressing problems facing this country, and we're stuck in a 4-year timeline. So for rectifying that imbalance for that part of the world, does your timeline look 100 years, 40 years, 200 years? Because
I think that's enough. Salam, would it be okay if I take 2 questions at a time?
No, absolutely.
Okay, so let's take
I need help also, maybe if you
think
can
a little, yeah.
Expand a little bit on what is said, because I didn't get everything that was said. So if you just can synthesize the questions.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
My question is that I believe, from what I read and about your background, that you offered something that is titled, maybe I'm wrong, The Third Way, and which I believe that today you kind of touched upon it here and there, and I would appreciate if you can elaborate more about what is the third way, because I think based on what I read, you have a full complete ideas. It's not just the recognition question, of course, because there is the day after the recognition, the years after the recognition. I would appreciate it, and I would really appreciate also if you could say a little bit about how it was accepted or not accepted by other group of Palestinians. Thank you.
Sure.
So we have the question on the third way, and the first, if I can synthesize, basically, he's, I think, asking about the timeline of resolution. Like, we're in a 4-year political cycle. We were talking before we came out about the next month and the presidential impact on the way things are going on the ground. What do you think is the appropriate time horizon to be thinking about this?
It's long, and that's one of the key impediments and problems, and certainly does not fit neatly into the length of political cycle around the globe. When we're talking about the United States, it's actually not 4 years, it's 2 years. You have elections over 2 years here, and also presidency 4 years. And we know all about that, and it complicates matters, and there are implications. For example, now in terms of what is being done and said about possible Israeli retaliation against Iran's recent missile attack on Israel. When it's going to happen, scale of it, that's subject matter of conversation, and also speculation as to Prime Minister of Israel looking at the situation, including the political cycle and where things are, what can be done, what cannot be done, and the interim period between the elections and the new president assuming presidency on January 20th. So there are issues, there are implications, and it cuts both ways. Ours is an intractable issue for sure. but domestic politics around the globe, actually, they come with problems as well. And that's the way democracy runs and functions. It has to be accepted. And an adjustment has to be made. So either you make your political cycle longer, that's the logic of things, or something needs to be done in order to kind of bring this long simmering conflict to a close sooner. The latter is very difficult and made more difficult by the war, an ongoing war. No sign of that stopping anytime soon. Basically, the short answer is it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
And therefore, it would require an institutional commitment on the part of the United States that cuts across, administrations. It's people, when you have it, even when you have a change of administration from Republican, Democrat, or vice versa, I mean, it's not that the country started or will start on 20th of January, 2025. I mean, the people prepare and people kind of benefit from experience. People build on things that, positive, they view positively, and they move away and they change policy in certain areas. But it seems to me, for the longest of time, since there was since the start of the political process, there came a point in time when it was taken as a given that Palestinian statehood was a national security interest for the United States. Now, how you define that and what constitutes a settlement that the United States can stand behind and work on to bring about is the judgment that people make. Traffic maybe did not bear enough to kind of get the administration to be more assertive than before. You referenced changes in the sentiment on the part of the population here, and particularly younger generation, not only younger generation, beginning to really show greater interest and understanding that's reflective in domestic politics. That makes it probably, that's something, if capitalized on, maybe can be helpful. Yeah. So let's just see. But I honestly, just to be honest with you, I can't say that we are anywhere near, conclusion of this.
Yeah.
Bringing war to an end is taking forever, and it has not ended. And the idea that somehow we're going to spring out of from death and misery to something that has eluded us for multiple decades, all of a sudden, state of Palestine, or even have something that people can invest in as realistically capable of leading us to a state of Palestine, that's a tall order. So let's just begin stopping the war, burying the dead, taking care of needs of people, lifting them up, dealing with the deep scars of this war that are going to last with us forever. You understand? This is a tall order. This is what leadership should be about. This is the kind of input we should be giving. And again, just so there be no misunderstanding, I'm saying what I'm saying in personal capacity. I represent no one. Oh, yeah. Not a party, not a faction, not a PA. I did serve because I wanted to serve, to do public service. There is nothing wrong with that. I did not set up the PA. It was established long before I joined it. It was not perfect then. It is not perfect today. But just in passing, just there's so much by way of wrong information, and I invite you all to really look up the record. If I was criticized for anything after the violent takeover of power in Gaza by Hamas in 2007, and me becoming prime minister, and I was a finance minister on the unity government that was headed by now the late Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh. He was my boss. That ended in the way it ended, and I became prime minister. If I'm criticized, among other things, because I actually insisted on keeping everybody on the payroll in Gaza, even if they were not reporting to work. So this is exactly the opposite of what was said here. Yeah. Exact opposite. And donors were coming to me and saying, how can you possibly do that? You're using external assistance and all in order to pay salaries for people who are not reporting to work in Gaza. And I knew it was really not about humanitarian assistance or anything like that. It's about the unity of the country. Because if you really do that, then that basically is telling people, you don't belong here. And I'm here to tell you, I always believe, if there's ever going to be a Palestinian state, it's not going to happen without Gaza. And the idea that, Palestinians will find fulfillment insofar as their aspirations, national aspirations are concerned in a state in Gaza, that's wrong. That's not going to really happen, nor is a Palestinian state going to happen without Gaza. Yeah. So that's just key. it really is bad. This is a university. Look, let me be a little bit assertive.
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Just let us show some deference to the facts, and then have a conversation. Please agree. Please yell. No one should be. I mean, I'm not here to defend myself. With respect to the faculty member who said, something about, I'm ashamed of this happening. Please don't feel this way. I mean, we should be thin-skinned if you are in public space. I feel this way. Honestly, I do not feel insulted. I'm saddened by how much there is by way of lack of deference to facts. As someone famously said, everybody is entitled to their opinion, but not to their own facts. Please do not really concoct them up and then take a position and lay accusation just like that. Third way.
The third way, yes.
Third way, actually, this is a name for an electoral slate that I put together with Hanan Ashraf and others.
Like a political party, basically.
Yeah. It's not a party.
Okay.
In 2006, elections were contested on the basis of an elections law that actually was a mixed system where you had 50% of the parliamentarians were going to be elected directly, district by district, and 50% were going to be elected unproportionally, slates. So we thought we put together a slate 1 month before the elections, literally 1 month before the elections. And so slates need to have a name. And so we called this third way. It was the name of an electoral slate. That's all there is to it. Formed just 1 month before elections, and that's what happened. And ever since then, I'm told, that slate got 2.4%. But, parties that had been in existence for tens of years before got nothing at the time. The outcome basically was clear and unequivocal victory, decided victory by Hamas in terms of majority. And the second best was Fatah, and then we won a couple of seats. And as if it's something to really be ashamed of or something like that. They're just like, it's part of the regular part of history. I don't really feel slighted by that outcome, nor is it something that really is bigger than it was or anything like that. It is what it is, and it's a thing of past. The sad thing is, since then, we never had elections anymore.
I know, yeah.
And we're separated from 2006 by a long period, 6 years, in which I served as Prime Minister with an opportunity to act on the basis of the platform that I've just basically sketched out to you today, and with actually, yes, some criticism and pushback in the way I described it, but at the same time, a lot of people are beginning to really buy into that idea. Am I really for the Palestinian Authority having become an instrument of disempowerment for the Palestinian people? Obviously not. Obviously not. But what is our solution to this? Disband it? I need for someone to tell me how you can do that. Really, honestly, this is a serious question. It's much easier said than done after all of these years of it being in existence. Doing away with it is a lot more harder than putting it together. And if it goes away in its present form, it will be replaced by something like it. And by the way, this Palestinian Authority, which is a product of Oslo, actually, if anything, had showed a knack for multiplication, multiplying, as opposed to elimination. Out of one, we all of a sudden had two, one in Gaza and one in West Bank. So we need to be serious about this. We need to take seriously the fact that has become an instrument of disempowerment. How to turn it into the instrument of empowerment it needs to be is the question, a real challenge, and that's something that I think can be and should be discussed.
Great. We have a long line of questioners, so I think I'll take them, and then we'll have a short time for answers before we turn back to Nick. So please.
Hello. Thank you very much for taking the time to come speak with us today. I very appreciate you coming. So both of you this evening spoke about the vital necessity for moderates to emerge as leaders in the conflict, to keep at bay those in their respective parties who want war, as you correctly said, Professor Ginsburg. So my question is, and I want to preface this by saying that I ask this question not to instigate anything, but out of genuine and respectful curiosity. Do you have in mind any specific Palestinian individual who you think could successfully be a moderate leader in this conflict, who wants to make peace with Israel? Perhaps one of your former colleagues, perhaps a personality in the media, or perhaps an emerging writer? I would love to know if you have any potential moderate Palestinian leaders in mind. Thank you.
Great. And I'll take notes also.
Yeah.
Please.
All right, I'll try and make it short.
Please, do. There's a long line of people behind you.
So I guess along the line of the last question, you talked about needing to promote moderates from both sides. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, again, I'm saying it, I have the utmost respect of you coming here. I attend this with real hope. But I think that a few months ago, you said that Hamas should be part of the Palestinian leadership. How me as a Jew that, they're lost brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers to an entity that I know want to kill all Jews. I mean, I've been there. I helped save Fatah people from Hamas in my time too. How does that reflect as something that we can have a dialogue with? How? I mean, I generally want to. Maybe I'm wrong.
It's a great question, and we'll get to it because it is important.
The second question, I guess, is
please make it fast.
From big to here. As you heard, the disruptions that were here. How me, as someone that really wants a dialogue, I've been trying to do that as an undergrad and in a grad school. I'm here to start to learn, and I want to also someone to hear me back. They don't let you speak. How can I even start a dialogue in a place like that, and even they don't let you speak? And maybe the one last question is that, if you may, I mean, I'm not very hopeful for that, but will you be willing to consider meeting with some of the Jewish Israeli community here that wants to, maybe the same ones that you think wants to replace you, but maybe they think that you want to replace them. Sit with us to a conversation, hear what our pain, we want to learn from you, and maybe have a meaningful conversation for once. Yeah,
thank you.
That's all.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. I really just want to know why there's such an attraction to this violent resistance. I mean, why aren't moderates dominating the conversation? Why are people, my peers here, so fanatically attached to this violent uprising when it has only led to 40,000 plus Gazas being killed and no end in sight?
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here. I was just wondering, we've talked a lot about what has gone wrong and how long the path is to fixing it. And I was wondering what you thought of the deal that was allegedly on the table before October 7th between Saudi Arabia, Israel, the US, and some sort of recognition of some sort of state of Palestine, and whether or not that is a better baseline than what Oslo was, and whether or not that moving into the future is another baseline for perhaps what we could look to once hopefully the terrible war has ended.
Is this about Saudi Arabia?
The Saudi plan.
Oh, okay.
Saudi plan also.
Good evening. Based on my experience, the root of peace and transformation of society begins with taking accountability for harms we have individually caused. All of us have caused harm and are capable of causing harm. Accountability creates trust and the foundation of treating each other with dignity. Can you each name one thing you have taken accountability for in causing harm, or a mistake that you have learned from? Any example, no matter how small, is fine. It is normal to feel internalized embarrassment, sadness, or anger about our own mistakes. Are you able to transmute these emotions on stage?
Can you speak up?
Are you able to transmute these emotions on stage to model how accountability and peace and transformation works?
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your time. I'm wondering, given your background in economics, what you imagine the day after plan for rebuilding Gaza would look like. Thank you.
So there's many, many questions and very little time, given the rhythm. So do you want to pick some of those and such? And
well, maybe if I missed something, I don't mean to be disrespectful to anything that was said. So please remind me.
Yes.
And I have time, by the way. I'm not in a hurry, but I'm respectful of your own time constraints. First, on question on names, I I think you'll forgive me. I mean, I told you beforehand, I would not want to really know what the questions are beforehand. If there's a question I would not want to answer, I'd just say I can't answer and I do not want to answer. Forgive me, I'm not really into the game of, kind of, what do you call it now? Naming people or suggesting that this leader is fit, this is not fit, or anything like that. But I'm a process kind of person. Yeah. So let's just really look for a process. I think there was the positive point I want to make here is for the longest of time, since President Abbas assumed office back in 2005, there's always this conversation about like who is going to succeed him. Who is going to succeed him? The question was always who, not what, not the process. And it's kind of really not respectful. It's not really good. I think the conversation should have been about a process of succession and preferably elections when and where they could be held, something which has not happened since then, by the way, so close to 2 decades. No need to get into details, but I think that's really a lot more constructive rather than to just say X, Y, or Z. And who am I to really handicap, chances of someone being more suitable than another? And as you do that, by the way, if I heard the question right, and forgive me, I'm above 40, so my hearing is not. If I missed something there, I also sense the conversation, not necessarily here, but throughout, it's as if it's really always just, if only you can get someone reasonable on the Palestinian side, then for sure, there's going to really be peace and all of that sort of thing. I think, the spectrum ought to be broadened a little bit when one is really considering, and without really getting into the name calling or, this or that or the other thing. And the same thing I would say about the later question, about the conversation about who wants to replace whom and all of that. And I would say, as I said or intimated when I was talking about like competing narratives and truths in different parties, and everybody has their own truth, that is a conversation people can have, and I'm prepared to really engage in it. But I'm telling you at the outset, as willing and ready and sympathetic I am to the idea of engaging in conversations like this, I don't think the conversation should end there. Why? Because, one day, I don't know when, and I'm sorry, but the question of how long this is going to take. I don't know when this will end. It will at some point end. It's not going to happen because one party can really somehow demonstrates beyond any doubt in the University of Chicago, and there is arbitration that says, you were right from the very beginning, your narrative prevails, and on the basis of that, you get the prize. If somebody is out there kind of thinking that this is the way to go, I'll be next in line. I'm going to just cheer you on, and I'm with you. If that really can settle it, maybe they can really bring it to an end. So yes, I think it's really good, and maybe Nick, in his fabulous exercise, can really take in conversation at some point, people really trying to deal with issues of narrative and all of that, and be open about it. I think it's healthy. Honestly, because that's when people really begin to believe, to feel that there exists an other who need not be cancelled, who should not be targeted for cancellation, marginalization, dehumanization. The humanity of all must be reconsidered on the same level. You understand? Getting to that point requires that conversation. And it certainly is a given that anyone with an iota of responsibility must be open to the possibility and opportunity for conversation like this. But I'll be the first to say, please don't park it there, because it's not going to. End of the day, you need to really, so what do we do? What do we do with this? So the question is, what do we do and how we go about it? That's when it really gets difficult, and that's where the focus ought to be. That's what the focus ought to be. And that is where you could have an idea or a concept similar to the one that I sketched. It has problems. I think if I understood the question correctly about if there is anything, I kind of own up to in terms of accountability, something I did wrong and all that. Why? I can, think of plenty of things I wish I had, another go at to really kind of do in a different way. But one thing, and I will not spare, I will not be economical. I can give you a list of drawbacks and weaknesses, and kind of wrong calls, if you will. I was right about, thinking that negotiations, the way they're proceeding, were not going to produce an outcome. And that we really needed to invest in something else. We needed to kind of really, since the whole world was saying, if only you can govern better, if only you demonstrate that somehow you are worthy of a state, which is a very unfair, by the way, standard, should not accept it. My approach to this was unfair, fair or unfair, it's a test, let's take it and pass it. To be pragmatic. Maybe you can count that as too much of a concession, for example, at the conceptual level. I believe then, and I do now, wholeheartedly, that that's a very serious concession to make, to be honest with you. One should never be accepting to compromise on a basic principle, like the natural, absolute right to all peoples around the world to self-determination. So at the conceptual level, I made a compromise, consciously, which was basically in the form of saying, fair or unfair, let's take that damn test and pass it. And I thought, did better than that. We wrote the test in the form of a plan that we launched in August of 2009. It basically said, this document, if implemented, has the promise of delivering statehood in 2 years. But what did we say? We Palestinians believe we can be ready for a state in 2 years. And the idea behind it politically was, that was the test. And we wrote it out. We said, this is what needs to happen. This is the overarching vision for the state of Palestine that we would want to have. Built on a set of universally shared, highly progressive values of tolerance, openness, equality, non-discrimination, and everything else that you would like to see as a guiding, overarching principle. Highly inspirational. Then kind of really worked downward from that basically starting point at all sectors, key sectors of management, whether it's security, administration, the economy, and whatnot, and developed sectoral visions. Like, what do we need to achieve in the social sphere, in health services, in education? So a vision for each one of the sectors. And the question, what do we need to do in order to have that mission fulfilled at the sectoral level? And the idea, the construction was, if we're successful in doing that at the sectoral level, that will feed into the success or realization of that overarching vision for that state of Palestine which we say we want. We said, here is a plan, short document, by the way, that also is available as a matter of public record for people to kind of look at for study and see how, so consciously, it realized the difficulties of kind of doing this under occupation, but at the same time, consciously, so to turn this into an instrument of inspiring people and empowering them. But the other side of it was to actually take matters in our hand, realizing that it's really not going to be the United States kind of by a magic wand doing something and solving the problem and waiting until the next administration maybe is going to have a different position. Maybe the elections in the United Kingdom are going to produce a better outcome. Maybe, etc. Or even in Israel. The idea was basically to say, since you all have been saying that you're not going to, you somehow, there is a test to pass. You somehow have to audition for that which otherwise is a natural right. If we pass it, that's building the reality of state, that is building the state, well then it's incumbent upon you to deliver on the sovereignty component, essentially, which was the way of saying we're tired of this, process. The political process and the way it was managed, it was brokered, it was handled, and all of that. So that was the idea. So somehow, this weak party kind of became an actor, all of a sudden. We drew the world into a quasi-contractual arrangement because nobody can really assume that we're going to succeed. So it sounds good. The minute that sounded good, it felt as if we had signed a contract with the world. We do this, and then we deliver, the international community delivers sovereignty. That real statehood, not we recognize you. You know what I'm saying? That was the idea. That was August 2009. By April 2011, less than a year and a half into this, I remember distinctly, the international community meeting in Brussels at the time, key players, all of them, the United States, European Union, everyone, of course, Palestinian Authority, Israel, everyone else. They concurred with the conclusions of 3 international reports, one by my former employer, the IMF, another by the World Bank, a third by the United Nations, and a fourth by another international entity, saying that the Palestinian Authority, this Palestinian Authority that everybody is kind of really targeting for disbanding and everything, has crossed the threshold of readiness for statehood. That was what we were looking for. We're looking for that kind of, recognition of, it's an unfair test. We took it, we passed it, but then didn't happen. It's a long story to say why, but that leads me to admission of another failure. The first is serious, is doctrinal, what I said about what I said. And I'm as guilty as hell, because it's not that, I did it without thinking about it. I thought about it. It was really, I walked into this. I knew it. It was by design, and I bear full responsibility, and I do not feel good about it. I did not feel good about it then. I don't feel good about it there. I feel guilty, and I will forever, because this is not something that people should really compromise on. But this is how desperate things were. And I thought we had a shot at actually changing the narrative, changing the discourse, and taking the bull by the horn and recalibrating the whole thing and starting anew and doing something with it. And that did not happen. It did not happen for a long list of reasons. And there, it's fair, just as I'm willing to say, about my own shortcomings. There are a lot of shortcomings, some of them self-inflicted within our own system, others, of course, the difficulty of doing this under occupation, say, very least, settlement activity, etc., military raids into citizen West Bank, long after security obtained in a very good way in West Bank. Nobody questions that. And it did not happen because we went out and shot at people in the way that was implied. Not at all. They're just far from it. It did not happen. Review the record. It was appealing to people's sense of commitment to the goal of having a state, which we openly talked about. The best way to get there is through this brand of resistance. And that's basically what we're going to do. So in the process, there were other mistakes, like, for example, maybe I thought that the idea was, notwithstanding its flawed ideological or foundation, ideologically speaking, I thought that the idea was so potent and powerful enough that on the strength of its appeal, that our leadership, the PLO is going to align behind it, that was going to really actually use it. And, beyond the technocratic vision, that this is not about technocracy. This is a fully integrated political vision. That did not happen, and I bear my share of responsibility for not having been active enough or effective enough in really bringing about that kind of support. Yeah, sure.
Salam, fantastic. It was really great. I want to move to Nick, to call Nick up again, but before we leave the stage, join me in thanking Salam Fayyad for his
There's a question about Hamas and
I know we'll do that in the front thereafter, I think.
Pardon?
But
we can get a chance to talk about that. Okay. Because there was a question about how is it?
It was a great question, and I had a question about it too. But I think with time we'll turn to Nick.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we open the curtains? Thank you. So it's hard to think about a topic these days that's more contentious and hard to talk about than this one, but we asked you to do it. I asked you to turn to somebody you didn't know and have a one-on-one dialogue, a one-on-one conversation, an actual moment of free speech with somebody else. Before you went into that conversation, this was not an opportunity to talk over each other, but rather an opportunity to talk with somebody else. I asked you to anticipate how you would feel about this conversation, how it would make you feel. And these black bars on the scale that went from 0 to 10, 0 being not at all feel this thing, to 10 being feel it a lot, you thought the conversation would be kind of meh, sort of is how it was. Fairly awkward, moderately awkward. You'd enjoy it somewhat. You'd like the person a bit, and you'd learn a bit. After the conversation, I asked you to report what your actual experiences. And this is what those look like, the red bars. Did not find the conversation to be, on average, nearly as awkward as you expected. You enjoyed it more than you thought. You liked it more than you thought, having that dialogue. You did not learn more than you thought. you would. There's a high bar in this crowd here with University of Chicago faculty and students. Actually, in our research, we find that the learning effects are much more context sensitive. They depend on what exactly you're talking about and how much expertise is actually there. The hedonic effects, the liking and the connection effects, are extremely robust. We find it anytime we get people together and talk with each other, they tend to like it more than they'd guess. I asked you how hostile, how thoughtful, how connected you'd feel. You thought it'd be, maybe a little bit hostile. It's a hostile topic after all. You thought the person would be pretty thoughtful. You thought you'd feel, moderately connected to the person. Again, you were off on all of these. Not in a massive way. It wasn't that you were wildly confused about this, but you were off in a systematic way. Wasn't as hostile as you thought. When you sit down and actually have a dialogue with somebody else, rather than grabbing the stage and monologuing for everybody, tends to be pretty good. You go back and forth. That's what conversation looks like. You found the person to be more thoughtful, and you felt more connected to your conversation partner than you thought. Conversation has that attribute to it. Dialogue goes back and forth. We talk about things we both care about, not things we don't care about. When we are one-on-one, that's what pulls us together, is that dialogue. I asked you how freely you thought you would speak yourself, how honest you'd be, how honest your partner would be. You thought you'd be a little more honest than maybe the other person would be. In fact, you reported being more honest than you thought on both. You found your partner to be more honest than you thought your partner might be, and you were more honest too. That's what happens when you sit down and talk one-on-one with somebody and are open to listening to them. You tend to feel free to speak freely, more than you might imagine. I asked you just in general, to what extent did this conversation go worse, better or worse than you expected? On a scale that went from -5, it went much worse than I expected. +5, it went much better than I expected. Some of you didn't have such great conversations. I apologize to those of you who had not such great conversations. But what you'll notice here is that the balance tips positive. Life's full of gambles. We have to bet on what kinds of interactions to have and which ones to avoid. Open dialogue like this, conversation like this, a pretty good bet. It's going to be pretty positive. Maybe even more positive than you'd expect. And I asked you at the end, how deep was your conversation today? How deep are the conversations you typically have with other people? And how deep do you want them to be with other people? You said this conversation today was deeper than the conversation you typically have with other people, on the far left and in the middle. But that you'd like your conversations to be deeper, as deep as the one you had today, out there in the world. And the question then is, why aren't you having those conversations? Why aren't we having those conversations? We're at an institution that prioritizes and prizes free speech and open expression. We're not going to solve the conflict in Israel, in Palestine, with these conversations necessarily. We don't have the power for that. But we can create a community where we engage with each other openly and honestly, and we learn perspectives that aren't just our own. And these data, this conversation you had here tonight, and the data we've been collecting over the last 10 years in my lab here at the University of Chicago, show that these kinds of effects are super robust. When you bring people together and sit them down and have them talk one-on-one with each other, even about exceptionally painful topics, like the one we talked about tonight, they tend to go better than you think. So why aren't you having these conversations more often? That's your question to answer. That's your choice to make. And I hope we all choose to go out and speak more freely and more often. One-on-one, not one-on-many, one-on-one. Thank you for taking your time to do this tonight. I really appreciate it. I'll send out a more complete debriefing of these results after this session. Thank you all.